In the end, the Khitan campaign was not a triumph of Japanese ingenuity. It was a tragic epilogue to a war that had already turned irrevocably against them. The United States, with its unmatched industrial might and strategic clarity, had seized the initiative and would not relinquish it. The Pacific was no longer a theater of Japanese dominance. It had become the proving ground for American resolve, innovation, and unity. As the war drew to a close, the remnants of the Khitan program were abandoned. Japan's submarine fleet, once a formidable force, was shattered by relentless American patrols and airstrikes. The surviving Khitan pilots, those who had trained but never launched, were left to grapple with the meaning of their sacrifice. Some would later speak of their missions with pride, others with sorrow. But for the Americans who had faced them, the memory was etched in steel and salt water, a reminder of the lengths to which an enemy would go and the strength required to overcome it. The psychological toll of Khitan attacks on American crews was profound. Unlike conventional torpedoes, which were mechanical and impersonal, the Khitan represented a human will bent on destruction. Sailors knew that behind each attack was a man who had chosen death, who had trained for months to ensure that his final act would be lethal. This knowledge added a layer of intensity to every sonar ping, every shadow beneath the waves. It was not just a battle of machines, it was a battle of minds, of endurance, of moral clarity. And yet the American response was never to mirror the fanaticism of their enemy. The U.S. Navy did not resort to suicide tactics or expend its men in hopeless gestures. Instead, it doubled down on professionalism, on technological advancement, on the belief that victory could be achieved without sacrificing the values that defined the nation. This contrast was stark, and it resonated deeply with the men who served. They were fighting not just for territory, but for a way of life that rejected the nihilism of the Khitan. In the months following the war, American naval historians and engineers studied the Khitan in detail. They examined the design, the launch procedures, the tactical doctrine behind its deployment. What they found was a weapon born of desperation, effective only under ideal conditions, prone to failure, and ultimately unsustainable. The lessons were clear. Innovation must be paired with strategy, and sacrifice must serve a purpose beyond symbolism. The Khitan had failed not because its pilots lacked courage, but because its conception lacked foresight. For the families of the American sailors lost to Khitan attacks, the grief was compounded by the nature of the weapon. To lose a loved one to a conventional battle was tragic. To lose them to a suicide attack was bewildering. It raised questions about the enemy's mindset, about the morality of warfare, about the cost of victory. And yet, in the face of such loss, these families found strength. They honored their sons, brothers, and fathers not as victims, but as heroes, men who stood firm against the tide of madness and helped bring peace to a world at war. The legacy of the Khitan campaign is complex. In Japan, it is remembered by some as a symbol of sacrifice, by others as a cautionary tale. In the United States, it is a footnote to a larger narrative of triumph, a reminder that even the most terrifying weapons can be overcome by courage, discipline, and unity. The men who faced the Khitan did not seek glory. They sought to protect their ships, their comrades, and the mission they had sworn to uphold. In doing so, they wrote a chapter of naval history that deserves to be remembered. Today, the wreck of the USS Mississinewa lies at the bottom of Ulithi Lagoon, a silent testament to the Khitan's brief moment of success. Divers have visited the site, paying respects to the sailors who perished there. Memorials have been erected, stories told, lessons passed down. And in those stories, the American spirit shines through not as a boast, but as a quiet affirmation of what it means to endure, to adapt, and to prevail. The Khitan attacks also underscore the importance of intelligence and countermeasures in modern warfare. After Ulithi, the U.S. Navy rapidly improved its anti-submarine tactics, deploying more sonar-equipped vessels, refining depth charge patterns, and enhancing perimeter security around anchorages. These adaptations saved lives and ships, and they demonstrated the Navy's ability to learn and evolve under pressure. It was a hallmark of American strategy throughout the war: observe, analyze, respond, and overcome. In contrast, the Japanese reliance on suicide weapons reflected a breakdown in strategic thinking. Rather than investing in sustainable technologies or seeking diplomatic alternatives, the High Command chose to expend its youth in acts of desperation. The Khitan was not a weapon of hope, it was a weapon of despair. And while its pilots were undoubtedly brave, their bravery was harnessed in service of a doomed cause. The United States, by resisting the temptation to mirror such tactics, preserved not only its military strength but its moral compass. The story of the Khitan also invites reflection on the nature of heroism. In American culture, heroism is often defined by selflessness, by the willingness to risk one's life for others, but also by the hope of survival and return. The sailors who fought off Khitan attacks did so not to die, but to live to protect their shipmates, to complete their missions, to return home. Their courage was rooted in life, not death, and that distinction matters. It speaks to a national ethos that values perseverance over martyrdom, resilience over sacrifice for its own sake. As we look back on the Khitan campaign, we must also consider its place in the broader arc of World War II. It was one of many desperate measures employed by Japan in the final year of the conflict, alongside kamikaze aircraft, balloon bombs, and last-ditch defensive lines. Each of these efforts failed to halt the American advance, and each exacted a terrible toll on Japanese lives. The Khitan, in particular, stands out for its intimacy, for the solitary nature of its mission, the isolation of its pilots, the eerie silence of its approach. It was a weapon that embodied the loneliness of defeat. And yet, from the American perspective, it was also a weapon that revealed the strength of unity. Ships did not face the Khitan alone. They were part of a fleet, supported by escorts, aircraft, and intelligence networks. When one ship was struck, others rallied to assist. Damage control teams worked in concert, medical personnel treated the wounded, and commanders adjusted tactics to prevent future losses. This collective response was the antithesis of the Khitan's solitary path. It was a reflection of the American way of war, coordinated, adaptive, and grounded in mutual support. In the decades since the war, the Khitan has faded from public memory, overshadowed by more dramatic episodes like the atomic bombings or the battles of Midway and Iwo Jima, but for those who served in the Pacific, it remains a vivid chapter. Veterans recall the tension of sonar contacts, the sudden explosions, the grim realization that an enemy had chosen death over surrender. They remember the drills, the vigilance, the camaraderie forged in the face of an invisible threat. And they remember the pride of overcoming it. For historians and filmmakers, the Khitan offers rich material drama, tragedy, and moral complexity. It is a story that challenges easy narratives, that invites us to consider the human cost of war, and that highlights the resilience of those who faced it. In telling this story to a pro-American audience, we affirm the values that guided our sailors: courage, discipline, and a commitment to life. We honor their service not by glorifying the enemy's sacrifice, but by recognizing the strength it took to defeat it. The Khitan campaign may have been a footnote in the grand sweep of World War II, but it was a footnote written in blood and steel. It tested the mettle of American sailors, and they passed that test with honor. They stood their ground, adapted their tactics, and protected their fleet. In doing so, they helped ensure that the Pacific would be a sea of freedom, not fanaticism. And that legacy endures. So when we speak of Khitan submarines attacking the United States, we do not speak of a strategic triumph. We speak of a desperate gambit met with steadfast resolve. We speak of young Americans who faced a terrifying new weapon and refused to yield. We speak of a Navy that learned, adapted, and prevailed. And above all, we speak of a nation that stood firm in the face of extremism and emerged stronger for it. That is the meaning of the Khitan story. Not the weapon itself, but the response it provoked. Not the death it carried, but the life it could not extinguish. Not the silence of the deep, but the roar of a fleet that would not be stopped.